Death and Dying. Let's talk about it in Season 2 of MC4P. I'm your host, Wren Ribeiro. Could these end-of-life conversations lead to a greater sense of joy, of peace?
For all eternity.
Tune in and find out. Mujéres Co-Labor for Peace.
Hello and welcome to Mujéres Co-Labor for Peace. This is our second season, and I am Wren Ribeiro, your host. I wish you complete wellness and lasting peace. Whether or not you have concerns about death and dying, and I've heard someone recently tell me that there's an alarming percentage of people who believe they won't actually die. Whether or not you are concerned about the crumbling political infrastructure in the United States and what that means for the 340 million of us living here, or whether or not you are concerned about the havoc we continue to wreak on that shrinking parameter of human ability to coexist with all other species on this planet, we are all going to die. So, why not talk about it? Why not plan for it so that it can be a celebration? Why not face it and turn our avoidant and anxious frowns upside down? I'm producing this video podcast series in the same vein as Season 1 to help myself mitigate anxiety and despair. There is a lot to feel anxious about in general and with respect to the idea of dying. Last season was about taking steps, however small, in healing the effects of misogyny, capitalism, as well as climate change. Season 2 is a series about peaceful dying. And for me, it's a way to investigate ways people respect elders as they complete their journey of life. It's a way to talk about some super important things that we often don't get or make the chance to talk about. So let's check in with our hearts. This is something that we did in each episode of Season 1, and it's also something beautiful we can do more often in our pursuits of peace. How is your heart right now? My heart is beating pretty loudly, and it's really taking up a lot of space in my chest. It's kind of an unusual feeling. And it's also a little tired, a lot tired this past week. I have a companion for Season 2 of MC4P, and they are plastic. I have this life-sized plastic skeleton that's in my car, wearing a black hat, a bow tie, and a black blazer. But AAA needed to tow said vehicle to an expert mechanic to figure out why it is shaking so badly. So we will get to meet the skeleton with no name. Maybe that'll be a fun thing people can do together next episode. Death and dying is a charged topic for many of us, particularly if someone we love has recently passed, or if one or more realities in our life is making the notion of mortality more front and center these days. I've sat down with one of my children to talk about death, and it produced a lot of tears and sadness. I tried sitting down and talking with both of my parents, who are both deceased. Neither one was able to talk about death. My mother said she was cool with it, as she had cancer for some years and had spent time thinking to herself about it. My father had a lot of pain and suffering that went unspoken. There is so much sadness in all of us, so many feelings we don't have safe spaces to express. In this season of MC4P, we will be talking about death and dying. We will be interviewing women experts, sometimes identified as death doulas, sometimes care workers in spaces like hospice and assisted living centers, sometimes in places unexpected, perhaps morticians or experts in funeral or burial subjects. We will also be doing interviews with people who are planning for their death with as much care and foresight as possible. These episodes will be a little bit longer than the typical length of episodes in this podcast because the content is too sacred to edit tightly. These interviews will be witnessed by someone special in the guest's life, and we hope these episodes will not only support these guests, but also all viewers in thinking about and living life more peacefully. If you meet one of these categories I just shared, please reach out at InnerFortune.com. When I sat to think about words in frames of reference or phrases that people use to talk about death and dying, I came up with this list of 15. 1, you can't take it with you, which of course is about accumulated money or possessions. 2, dying as a notion is taboo. It's now about aging, or perhaps the phrase is, aging is the new dying. 3, the only certainties in life are death and taxes. 4, bury me 6 feet under. 5, meet your maker. 6, kick the bucket. 7, pushing up daisies. 8, bought the farm. And this is a reference to the GI Bill that made land. This is in 8, bought the farm. And this is a reference to the GI Bill that made land cheap or free to government-issued servicemen. 9, rest in peace. 10, meet St. Peter at the pearly gates. 11, he bit the dust. 12, she breathed her last. 13, they passed away. 14, dropping like flies. And 15, croaked and paid the piper. I kind of put both in there. Whew, this is not an exhaustive list. I forgot to add ashes to ashes and dust to dust, but it is full of metaphor. In researching end-of-life practices, it is easier to find details about Asian cultural practices than others, particularly European. I will get into some reasons for this in a future episode, but for now, I want to share a couple things I learned that are really interesting. In South Korea, some people like to make beads out of their ancestors' ashes. I imagine the process of keeping these beads clean is also part of the ritual of remembrance. In a very recent Pew Research Center report by Kelsey Jo Starr, she writes about the predominance of offering gifts, food, burning incense, and celebrating death anniversaries among countries including Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Japan. Many Japanese people are preparing for Obon, an annual festival for celebrating ancestors, which is usually mid-August. The festival is often compared to Mexico's Day of the Dead, or Dia de los Muertos, and China's Hungry Ghost Festival. Now I'd like to turn to a couple of video clips to bring in some different perspectives on death and dying.
One its change, all revolving, burials and births, one linked to the other, a great circle of life.
Just think, someday we'll be buried here, side by side, 6 feet under, in matching coffins, our lifeless bodies rotting together for all eternity.
All right, we did not die today. I'll call that an unqualified success.
So normal human dying, just a really gentle process, something we can recognize, something we can prepare for, something we can manage. And this should be something we can celebrate. This is something we should be able to console each other with. But because it's become impolite to talk about dying, it's the really best kept secret in medicine. So, in my humble opinion, dying is something we should be reclaiming, we should be talking about, we should be consoling each other about. please pass that on.
This conversation happens when folks tend to be older or there may be an illness. And so I think in the minds of everyone, it's kind of something to happen when you're quote unquote old and sick. Do you have an advance directive? Have you had this important conversation? And one of the people said, I'm 87 and still ticking, so I don't need that. And it was just this idea of that's something I'll think about when I'm sick. And so really our campaign is all about trying to get anyone over the age of 18 to talk about this so that it's not this kind of scary, death-focused, if you bring it up, it means something's wrong with you conversation. Because as we all know, anything can happen to anyone at any time. Just because you are 18 doesn't mean you're invincible.
We plan weddings, but we don't plan how we want our lives to be at the end and who we want to direct that if we can't do it ourselves. So I've embraced that. And in my work as a hospice nurse early on, I was talking with families about these kinds of plans, and I saw the difficulties that families have with this. And I want to see more community engagement.
The thoughts of death, I don't like to dwell on them for longer than like 10 or 15 hours a day. So someday you'll die.
According to Sarah Emanuel in her article in The Revealer called Why Jewish Comics Are Obsessed with Suffering and Death, and to modern or contemporary Jews like herself, spiritual conversations of death and dying, those that contemplate divinity or the cosmic realm in relation to death, are entirely irrelevant. I look forward to following threads like this throughout the second season of Mujéres Co-Labor for Peace. We will all approach an inevitable conclusion to life as we currently know and experience it. Let's find ways to not only approach that conclusion with grace, but let's celebrate the memories, the joys, the achievements, the beauty, the difficult moments that taught us so much, and the spirit and the faith that has carried us all along the way. Maybe you've heard the story from the Bible about Abraham as he was preparing to sacrifice his only son Isaac to show his love for God. I would like to read an invocation about the Akedah moment, and Akedah is spelled A-K-E-D-A-H, the moment of clarity God gave to Abraham as he was preparing to sacrifice Isaac. Anticipating the Akedah moment. May I listen for truth, the critical moments between emptiness and idea, between idea and choice, between choice and doing, between doing and continuing to do. Each machination of manifestation all along the continuum of creation, in awe of the known and the unknown. Amen. I am Wren Ribeiro, and I thank you for joining this first episode of the second season of Mujéres Co-Labor for Peace. Please look for MC4P videos on the YouTube channel InnerFortune 1 and consider supporting our work.
Mujéres Co-Labor for Peace.